Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has said on CBS that Washington may not be able to create a scenario to end Russia's war in Ukraine, though it will continue trying. This comes as President Trump hinted of more news about Russia to be announced soon in his Truth Social. European leaders, including leaders from Germany, France, UK, Italy, and Frontlines, should serve as the basis for peace negotiations with Russia. He made the remarks ahead of a virtual meeting with European leaders and his upcoming Washington visit to meet President Donald Trump following Trump's summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. European leaders, including leaders from Germany, France, UK, and Italy, and Ursula von der Leyen will accompany President Volodymyr Zelensky to Washington on Monday for talks with President Donald Trump. Hamas has rejected Israel's plan to relocate Gaza City residents, calling it a new wave of genocide and displacement for hundreds of thousands, according to statements released today. The Israeli military said it is deploying tents and shelter equipment to move civilians from combat zones to the south of the enclave. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that ending the war now would lead to a repeat of the October 7, 2023 attacks and an endless conflict, while nationwide strikes and protests erupted in Israel today as families of hostages demanded the government pursue a deal with Hamas instead of escalating the Gaza campaign. 3 people were killed and 8 others were injured in a shooting at the Taste of the City lounge in Brooklyn's Crown Heights, Manhattan, New York. According to local police commissioner, multiple shooters were involved with no arrests made yet as police continue their investigation. Bolivia has begun their general elections today with 7.9 million voters amid its worst economic crisis in a generation, marked by 25% inflation and severe shortages of dollars and fuel. Frontrunners Samuel Doria Medina and former President Jorge Tito Quiroga each poll around 20% now, with a runoff set for October 19th if no candidate wins outright. At least 10 people were killed and 2 remain missing after a flash flood swept through Inner Mongolia's Bayan Nur city when a riverbank burst, according to local media reports. The tragedy struck late Saturday as the East Asian monsoon continues to unleash severe weather across Asia. French President Emmanuel Macron chaired a high-level video call moments ago from Brigançon gathering key allies of Ukraine, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Let's listen into the discussions between the leaders.
For making yourself available and taking the time. And especially for those for whom it's very late, and just before your journey, I was mentioning the fact that we will give the floor very rapidly to Japan, Australia, especially because it's very late for you, and thank you again. I think we have several objectives in this VTC, and let's try to be super efficient. Number one, it's to have a debriefing of our conversation with President Trump yesterday. And right after the Anchorage summit, to be sure that everybody in this coalition is at the same page. The second objective is to strategize together to prepare the visit of Volodymyr tomorrow in Washington, D.C. Some of us will be with Volodymyr. And to ensure this meeting, as Mark aptly said, is not a meeting where we will be blocked in one scenario. The objective of this meeting very clearly is as well to be completely clear about the security guarantees we want, the next steps, and how to organize the next meetings with President Putin, Ukraine, US, and Europeans. And perhaps the third point of this VTC, the third objective, is as well to strategize how to keep the pressure agenda alive in case President Putin doesn't come to the trilateral meeting or the quadrilateral meeting, and how we strategize on the next steps. I don't want to be longer for making yourself available.
Now for this discussion, we're joined by Glenn Grant. He's an ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defense Minister, joins us live from Kyiv. And also we have another guest, Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you both for joining us today. Glenn, I would like to start with you. Now, given the growing global concerns about the war in Ukraine still continuing, what role do you see for European defense alliances in securing a long-term peace agreement, especially as more countries are starting to take more active diplomatic stance now?
Well, I think the first thing is, and the most important thing is, that the Europeans have got to understand that this war is, in its present form, is not going to be won by diplomacy, because Putin doesn't give a stuff for what people say and talk to him. You could see that in the meeting with Trump. I mean, if Putin was worried about diplomacy, then there would have been a different action in the Trump meeting. He just came in, he said what he wants to supposedly the most powerful man in the world, and left, and without looking at all worried about what he was saying or what he was asking. So the Europeans have got to get past this in their brain, that all their fine talking is not going to do anything with Putin, and they've got to come round to start looking for more concrete steps. Obviously sanctions is one of those steps, but sanctions are still pretty weak and fluffy. They never work with North Korea or Iran, so why should they work with Russia? And they're going to have to find some actions that are much stronger and actually make Putin worried. The bad thing is that I just don't see that they're actually thinking about these actions. They're spending more time thinking about what guarantees we can get, during the peace dividend or whatever. But they're not going to get peace, so they might as well actually start preparing themselves for the realism of war.
And thank you for sharing that. I would like to take Dr. Satoru next for his stance. What's your stance? What do you think that more countries start to take more active diplomatic stance, is it going to change anything for tomorrow?
I think this is a meeting to persuade President Trump. Because current situation, not only in the European country but also Japan, worry about influence of the ceasefire. Because if Russia create image, Russia win the war in Ukraine, it will affect other countries' attitude. In case of Japan, Japan concerns the attitude of China. Because if changing the status quo by force is possible, in this case, China will think that invading Taiwan is one of the very useful methods to change the status quo by force. So that's why view from Japan, Japan do not want to create the situation which has the image that Russia win in Ukraine, and changing a status quo by force is possible. So that's why, of course, tomorrow the real negotiations happen between President Trump and the other countries. But in this case, more countries gather the effort to persuade President Trump, and not accept Russia's logic. Instead of this, if Russia seeks a victory, the US side or NATO side, including Japan or other Asian allies, should not accept Russia's logic. That is currently the Japanese government thinking, I believe. And so this means that European countries, the Japanese country, both are thinking the same thing in this case.
Thank you for sharing that. Now I would like to go back to our guest, Glenn. Now, with key European leaders such as President Macron and Chancellor Merz coordinating closely on Ukraine's future and joining them tomorrow, what do you think is the most significant challenge for Europe tomorrow in balancing military support for Ukraine with broader geopolitical stability?
The big problem is credibility, because they haven't had credibility so far. And as my colleague said just now, and he's absolutely right, they've got to persuade Trump to actually to take this whole thing seriously on behalf of not just Ukraine, but the rest of the Western world. Because at the moment, it would appear that we're looking at Trump and Putin on one side and the rest of us on the other, and that is not a clever situation to be in any way, shape, or form. So the Europeans have got to show that they're credible. My worry is that a lot of them will try to do this by Zoom. Really, they all need to go to America. They all need to get on the plane tonight and tomorrow and to be there in Trump's office, every single serious leader, because then and only then will he start to take this seriously. If they're on Zoom and they're there and there's only maybe one or two of them in the room, it won't sway him. I'm absolutely sure of that. He will not be swayed, and he'll still have his anti-Ukraine stance that Ukraine has got to give stuff to Russia, not that Russia has got to compromise in any way.
Thank you, Glenn, for sharing that. Now I would like to ask Dr. Satoru for his take on the same question as different leaders join tomorrow coordinating closely on Ukraine's future. What do you think is the most significant challenge for Europe in balancing military support for Ukraine with broader geopolitical stability tomorrow?
A little bit irony situation will created by the current US and Russia summit. Because motivation why the President Trump want to end the war in the Ukraine is indeed his China policy is the reason we believe. So because relocating resources they spend in Europe, President Trump wants to reduce resources in Europe and relocate resources resources to the Indo-Pacific is because China is the main rival for the United States, he believes, and that's why the counter-China policy is a policy he wants to spend more resources. In this case, other region, including Europe, Middle East, or other region, is second priority, and the first priority is Indo-Pacific, he is thinking. In this case, withdraw from the other region is interest. But view from Japan, this is irony, because yes, if US focusing on the Indo-Pacific, this is welcome. But to deter China, we should not create the image Russia is winning and China can do the same. So that's why even if the US relocates the resources from Europe, ending Russia's invasion to Ukraine should not be the image of the Russia's victory. So that's why the view from Japan, how to manage the President Trump's policy, or how President Trump should not abandon the he will not abandon Ukraine, I think, but at the same time, this image is very important. Sending the message is very important, we believe. So that's why Japan want to improve this negotiation and persuade Trump. Even if the withdrawals, we should be careful. That is Japan want to send, and I think in this case, Japan's interest and Europe's interest is the same, I believe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru and Glenn Grant, for both joining us and sharing that insight. We'll come back to you for our next topic as well. Now we stay in the region. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen hosted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Brussels today, just a day before his high-stake talks in Washington. At the joint press conference, Zelensky said Ukraine urgently needs a ceasefire to address Russia's demands, but emphasized that Kyiv will not be sidelined in any negotiations. He called for EU's involvement in binding security guarantees, adding that security must function in practice like NATO's Article 5. Von der Leyen echoed that sentiment, declaring Ukraine must become a steel porcupine, undigestible for potential invaders. She added that the EU, alongside allies, is prepared to support Ukraine's sovereignty, with no restriction on its armed forces or its right to cooperate with partners. Let's listen in to both the leaders.
Since the territorial issue is so important, it should be discussed only by the leaders of Ukraine and Russia at the trilateral Ukraine, United States, Russia. So far, Russia gives no sign that trilateral will happen, and if Russia refuses, then new sanctions must follow.
Is to protect both Ukraine and Europe's vital security interests. Ukraine must be able to uphold its sovereignty and its territorial integrity. There can be no limitations on Ukrainian armed forces. We welcome President Trump's willingness to contribute to Article 5-like security guarantees for Ukraine. And the coalition of the willing, including the European Union, is ready to do its share. Point number one. Therefore, it is so important to have as soon as possible a trilateral meeting between the President of Ukraine, the President of the United States, and of Russia.
Now for this discussion, we go back to Glenn Grant. He's an ex-advisor to Ukrainian Defense Minister, and Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute. Thank you, Glenn and Dr. Satoru, for staying with us. Glenn, I would like to come back to you. So now President Zelensky's call for binding security guarantees and for Ukraine to be treated with the same level of commitment as NATO's Article 5. It raises significant implications. So how feasible is it for the EU to implement such guarantees, and what would it mean for the future of European defense?
Well, let's be quite clear at the moment. There is no European defense. That's the first thing. There are a collection of countries that have got their own defense structures, but there's nothing of any coordinated fashion. So they could make an Article 5 guarantee, but probably only within the NATO structure. But I'm sorry, but I just don't see Trump signing up to an Article 5 guarantee for Ukraine in any way, shape or form. I may be wrong, but I just don't sense that is actually what he means. Because if he signs up to Article 5 and Russia crosses the boundary in any way, it means that America is at war with Russia. And he and all the European countries have done everything that they possibly can to avoid putting troops into battle. They're running backwards as fast as they can in this regard. So what do security guarantees mean if they don't go to Article 5? It means they're worthless. And so it's a bit rich of the European Union that doesn't have a proper defense structure and doesn't have an organization and can't put troops in the field properly or quickly. It's a bit rich for them to talk about defending Ukraine when they can't, in some cases, cannot even defend their own countries. So I think we are a long, long way away from what these people are talking about. And to be blunt, all it does is waste time and gives Russia more chance to keep pushing forward on the front line.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Glenn Grant, for joining us and sharing that insight. And thank you very much to Dr. Satoru Nagao as well. Now we move on to our next news. Air raid sirens interrupted speeches at a protest in Hostages Square in Tel Aviv, forcing people to seek shelter or sit on the ground. The sirens sounded for several minutes before the speeches could resume. Thousands of Israelis today have taken part in a nationwide strike in support of families of hostages still held in Gaza. The protesters are calling on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reach an agreement with Hamas to end the war and release the remaining captives. Demonstrators waved Israeli flags and carried photos of hostages as whistles, horns, and drums echoed at rallies across the country. There were also some protesters who blocked the streets and highways, including the main route between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Negotiations towards a ceasefire that could have seen more hostages released collapsed in July. Hamas has said that it would only free the remaining hostages if Israel agrees to end the war. While Netanyahu has vowed that Hamas cannot stay in power, Netanyahu has in fact announced a major offensive in Gaza. Now, for this discussion, we're joined by Ali M. Abushbak. He's an independent Palestinian researcher, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you, Ali, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu's criticism of these protests raises concerns about the government's approach to public dissent. So do you think this dismissing these protests, especially, what does it say especially for families of hostages?
Thank you, Osama, for having me. It's worth mentioning that the protest of the families captive and hostages in Gaza, it's increased and escalated month after month, while we have seen last month it was just only limited for a protest and normal protest, and today it's involving the strike and the general strike in Israel. We have seen several of workers in Haifa port, they are participating in the strike in Israel, and also we have seen they closed the highway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. So I guess it's the tool of the protest, it's escalated and developed day after day, and they got realized that Benjamin Netanyahu is not giving any attention of the captive in Gaza and the safety of the captive in Gaza. That make the opposition of Benjamin Netanyahu, it's growing. Definitely Benjamin Netanyahu is not happy for these things, and the next year it's the coming election for Israeli parliament that will make him back and will reduce his popularity in Israel. Now Benjamin Netanyahu is facing a danger, and now he's in front of a hard duty for him. Either he's continue the Israelis' plan to seize Gaza and to keep the hostages under the risk of the Palestinians' resistance. Either they will kill by their by the people who's keeping them and holding them, or by Israelis' troops. Because last 2 years we have seen that in Shujaiya neighborhood there is 3 cases of Israeli captive have been killed by Israelis' fire. So that will put them in the risk, and there is a 2 assumption about and 2 scenario for their future for the captive. So Israeli community now it's completely frustrated of this policy and Benjamin Netanyahu, and he's trying to buy the time by this kind of statement, putting allegation on Hamas and the mutual allegation between Hamas and Israel. It seems that there is no glimmer of hope to end the war, and at least for ceasefire, contemporary ceasefire between both of them, that will elaborate the situation on the ground. Only, as I said, the casualties of this war, it's civilians from both of sides, while the families captive, they are facing the grave because of their captive away from them, and also the Palestinians every day they lost several of soul and people on the ground.
Yes, thank you very much, Ali, for sharing that insight. As we stay on the topic, please stay with us as we come back to you as well. Now, several displaced people have been seen fleeing south from Gaza City following the Israeli government's announcement of its intention to take control of the city. The Israeli military has said that it is preparing to provide tents and other equipment starting from Sunday ahead of its plan to relocate residents from combat zones to the south of the enclave to ensure their safety. According to Israeli military, Hamas has said that today that Israel's plan to relocate residents from Gaza City constitutes a new wave of genocide and displacement for hundreds of thousands of residents in the area. Hamas has said that the planned deployment of tents and other shelter equipment by Israel into southern Gaza was a blatant deception. The Israeli government has faced sharp criticism at home and abroad, including from some of its closest European allies, over this announcement that the military would soon seize Gaza City. Following the announcement, the Gazans have expressed their disapproval towards the Israeli plan and have expressed uncertainty over their future.
أنا يعني بدي 3000 شيكل معيش 3 شيكل منهم. كيف بدي أصل غاد أنا بدي أقعد أمشي أنا وأطفالي ومرتي وأبوي الكبير وأمي الكبيرة يا من بدي نصل رفح ولا بدي نصل قانونس ولا فيش وسع أصله. أنت قاعد بتقول لي انزع على الجنوب. أنت ماخذ رفح وماخذ قانونس ونص الدير ونص من صلاة. وين نروح؟ مليون نفر وين بدك توديهم أنت؟ هي طبعا واضحه الامور يعني ما فيها حل انساني هو الامور يعني مبينه الحلول الانسانيه بتجيش بطريقه التهجير هي عمليه تهجير جديده ونزوح جديده للسيطره على الارض والسيطره على المناطق واحنا بنطالب من دوله اسرائيل بانها تسحب جيشها وتسحب جنودها من غزه وعوده الناس والنازحين الى بيوتهم واماكن سكنهم القديمه.
Now we go back to our discussion with Ali M. Abushbak. He's an independent Palestinian researcher. Thank you, Ali, for staying with us. Now, is this feasible, just like we saw on our screen, that residents in Gaza, they said that so far it's not achievable that they're saying to move to south. How far is it in reality, and what's the reality over there?
Some of the things is it's not about the far and about the distance between Gaza City and Rafah or otherwise. It's about the transportation. There is no fuel for the cars, for the track to move the civilians from Gaza City to south part of Gaza. This is on one hand. On other hand, Usuma, the Palestinian during this war, when the Israel ordered the civilians from North Gaza to displace to South Gaza, they suffered and they faced several of barriers for their life, and you can't imagine what does it mean. You live in the tent during the winter, during the summer. I have called several of civilians. They are completely frustrated of living under the tent and without a shelter. Without they are all of them, they are vulnerable. Israel since past 1 week heavily and relentless. They are bombarding Zaytun neighborhood, the southern north part of Gaza City, which may force the civilians from that area at Zaytun neighborhood and at Daraj neighborhood also the same in the southern east Gaza City. They forced to leave their places and to displace, despite there is no space even in the Gaza City for the people who's establishing their tent to live and to survive after the Israel bombed their home and demolished their home during the last phase of the conflict between Hamas and Israel before the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel in the mid of January 2025. So Osuma, it's a very hectic thing. Civilians are thinking where we should go. They are suffered during the displacement. They are suffered because of there is no shelter. They are suffered to manage their life. Especially now, Osuma, it's worth mentioning that the humanitarian situation in Gaza City as well, it's very terrible. People, the price of the element and the price of the supplies, yes, it's increasingly terrible and it's high. That means the ordinary civilian, they can't manage their everyday life and their everyday meal. There is on side other things. Osuma, a human rights organization inside Israel, like a Bet Shalom, Bet Salem, or the Home of Peace in Israel, they criticize and lambast this plan for the Israelis. IDF displaced the civilians from other place to other place. They consider it as a genocide. It's also worth mentioning that today the Prime Minister of Denmark she lambasted Benjamin Netanyahu, and she considered Benjamin Netanyahu himself is the issue between the Palestinian and Israel, and he's also slowing down the peace process and making barriers for the peace process between Palestinian and Israel.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you very much for sharing that insight and giving us the reality in the ground. Thank you very much. That was Ali M. Abushbak. He's an independent Palestinian researcher, joined us live from Cairo. Now we move on to Europe. Spain is battling one of the worst heat waves of the year as firefighters struggle against 20 major wildfires. Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez warned of difficult days ahead during a press conference in Ourense. Temperatures are expected to soar to 45 degrees Celsius, making firefighting efforts even harder, Spain's weather agency says. Sanchez has announced that 500 more members of the military agency emergency unit will join the 1,400 already deployed firefighters. He said this could be the biggest EU civil security deployment in history. In Galicia's Ourense province, several fires merged into a massive blaze, forcing roads and rail closures. Officials are urging residents to follow safety guidance closely. Let's listen into what the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez had to say.
Quedan días complejos. La meteorología, por desgracia, no nos está acompañando y, por tanto, sí solicitaría a los ciudadanos y ciudadanas que estén muy atentos a lo que nos digan las instituciones, los profesionales, los técnicos, que tengan confianza en ellos y en ellas y que, por tanto, sean lo más precavidos posible en estos momentos tan difíciles y en estas horas. Probablemente sea el mayor despliegue de la historia del mecanismo europeo de protección civil el que se está produciendo en España, y hay que reconocer esa solidaridad a países como Eslovaquia, como Francia, como Italia, como Holanda o como Alemania, que están desplegando no solamente efectivos, que se van a poner a la orden del sistema de protección civil español, sino también capacidades, equipamientos para, entre todos, poder perimetrar y extinguir los incendios. La respuesta clara a tener incendios ahora de esta magnitud, a tener danas como estamos teniendo en otoño o en invierno, es que la emergencia climática que asola el mundo cada vez es más acelerada, es más grave y es más asidua, sobre todo en lugares.
Now we stay in Europe. Voters in Bolivia head to the polls today in a general election marked by economic turmoil and the absence of former President Evo Morales, who is barred from running. Polls show conservative opposition figures Samuel Doria Medina and Jorge Tuto Quiroga leading the field, each below 30% support, with nearly a quarter of voters undecided. The race is expected to be close and could head to a runoff on October 19th if no candidate wins more than 40%, with a 10-point lead ahead. For the first time in almost 2 decades, the ruling Movement for Socialism, or MAS, faces the real prospect of defeat. Its official candidate, Eduardo del Castillo, trails badly, while Senate President Andrónico Rodriguez has broken ranks to mount his own leftist bid. Bolivia's fragile economy dominates the campaign. Inflation has surged to 23%, a 4-decade high, leaving many households struggling with soaring food and fuel prices. Analysts say this election marks a crossroads, with voters weighing whether to punish MAS and open the door for centrist or right-leaning leadership. Polling stations open at 8 a.m. local time and close at 4 p.m. local time, with preliminary results expected on Sunday night and full results within 7 days. Now for this discussion, we're joined by Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's a fellow at Hudson Institute, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you, Dr. Satoru, for staying with us. Now, this movement of socialism is facing an unprecedented challenge after nearly 2 decades. Do you think the current government's handling of Bolivia's economic issues and internal divisions had led to this dramatic decline in support?
Yes, simply the economy is bad because Bolivia's economy relies on the export of the natural gas or other minerals. So price of the natural gas or other minerals is affecting the economy itself. So that's why current situation economy is very bad and they need to reform. Under such kind of situation, opposition can get popularity. But at the same time, the interesting is not only Bolivia but also the other South American countries, Latin American countries. Indeed, right-wing party is getting popularity. For example, Argentina, El Salvador, or Ecuador, these countries, right-wing party got popularity. So if the right-wing candidate win the presidential election in Bolivia, the same wind is coming, so that is very interesting point. And another interesting point is relation with the United States. So when the Bolivia need to reform the economy, in this case, they need to promote the trade. In this case, Western country, cooperation with the Western country could be the important. So that's why if the right-wing party maintains their status, in this case, they do not want to cooperate with the Western countries. But if the right-wing party win the election, there's a possibility they will open the door to and connect it with the United States or other Western countries, I think. So that's why this present election is very important, caused by the economy, but at the same time it will affect diplomacy, all aspects of the diplomacy, I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Satoru Nagao, for joining us and sharing your insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.